I am ready.
Dun, 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 dun. 1, 2, 3. Hey, everybody.
Oh, I know. That would make me uncomfortable.
Is there a character on The Simpsons that does that?
Yeah, I mean, you should
Everybody.
come out from under the table doing that.
Well, it's almost Halloween. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Chalkboard History, Crash Course History, Tennessee Campaign, everything you'd want to know, and probably stuff that you do not want to know. But
I guess probably appropriate.
you're listening, so turn it off or stay tuned. We're going to talk about...
Ultimatum time.
We're going to talk about J.D. Vance,
No.
Tim Walz,
Cemeteries.
cemeteries.
Where someone, by November, someone's political career will end up is in the cemetery. But there we go. Cemeteries.
I can only hope.
That was good.
I can only hope that I live long enough to see the final procession. I really, really, really hope to see it. So cemeteries, we're going to talk about the Confederate Cemetery at Carnton.
Yep.
And also Stones River National Cemetery, but this is really about those who died at Franklin. So lead us through what happens the day after the Battle of Franklin.
Oh, God.
South of town.
I think you and I have talked about this before, and you've said it so perfectly, is that at some point you almost wonder if the men that survived wish that they had been the ones that died because they didn't have to see what the south side of Franklin looked like the next morning. I mean, just a blanket of dead and wounded as far as you can see. And very, very quickly then, I think it's Louis Littell talks about how he watched as veterans of the Army of Tennessee were burying their comrades, weeping like women. And they're burying them in these kind of improvised, quick, hasty dug graves, marking them as best as possible. So sometimes it's an ammunition crate lid, sometimes it's a broken piece of a fence board or something, just trying to identify as many men as possible. But you really watch as the Army of Tennessee buries, the core of its strength, right? The Cheatham's Corps, the Stewart's Corps men. Those guys are the hard fighting Army of Tennessee, and now they're kind of gutted right there, and they lose not only the men, but there's also that morale blow, right? Think about the Missouri Brigade, 696 men. There's only 230 really left the next morning. So you've got an entire plot of men that need to be buried out of what was one of the hardest fighting, and we talk about them in this series, that's why I reference them, hardest fighting brigades in the entire war, and they're burying most of their strength right there on the south side of town. Federal soldiers being buried by captured federal soldiers, POWs. I think Erastus Winters kind of speaks to that in his Fighting for Uncle Sam, 50th Ohio. He talks about how there's, burial details that have to be done. And I guess after that's done, you got hospitals that are sprung up, and then the armies are gone, and 18 months goes by.
When I was working on my my last book, I was going through pension files for some of the guys in the 183rd Ohio, and I found, because I read a lot of accounts about the dead being piled 3 and 4 deep, and just thinking about what happens to the human body when it's hit by bullets or artillery fire. I mean, it's just it really is terrible. It's just ghastly work. But there was this account of a soldier who had been captured, and he was combing through the federal dead, and he found someone that he knew, and he was alive. And he said that he had been hit, the bullet had gone straight through, but it had hit this spot between apparently the brain and the eyes, where both eyes were out, hanging. And I this was just part of a pension file. And I think he said hanging by the tendons. And I was just like, oh my God. We so often don't think about Civil War battlefields being like a World War II battlefield. We have those few photos of the dead at Antietam or Spotsylvania or Gettysburg. And then there are just these graphic things that these men see. And it's no wonder they never really talked about Franklin, because there was the battle itself, and then there was this god-awful aftermath. And so there's about 2,500 men buried that day, and I know I was fascinated because I'd heard all the old stories about how they were first buried and then how they were exhumed. And as it turns out, the story that I had long been told was the Federal soldiers were moved first. Well, that's not the case. It was actually the Confederates that were moved first. So they were exhumed, a pretty well-known story, early 1866, and moved to the Confederate cemetery at Carnton.
I think what's always amazed me about that is the speed in which they're moved, though. March of 66, June of 66.
Yeah, but you've got probably 3 or 4 guys that are digging bodies 6 days a week, and they were in a relatively close proximity, but yeah, it's all they did. It's just they dug bodies up day after day after day, and buried them in small boxes, because you're not really dealing with whole bodies a year and a half later. They're mostly burying bones and fragments of clothing and some tissue, just nasty work. And they buried 1,481. But there's such a gap between how many there Confederate dead, because Schofield said there were 1,750 Confederate graves, and there's certainly some guys that even died in the weeks that followed. So I think there's probably north of 1,800 who died. So what's the difference? Well, some families took bodies home,
Right.
but there were some guys that there was nothing to bury.
Right.
They were just gone. They were just fragments and pieces. And then there's the Federal dead. And as I worked on my cemetery book, I stumbled across these accounts where it finally showed what had happened to them. And what a story. Like, they were exhumed and moved to Columbia, buried at Rose Hill. And there was a movement to make Rose Hill a national cemetery. I bet most people who live around this area they don't even know that there was a consideration.
Yeah.
There was also a consideration to make a national cemetery in Franklin, but there was such resistance.
Yeah, the quartermaster for the Army, Donaldson, goes to town and he says, we send out our quartermasters to people in town. We ask if they have land for sale for a cemetery, and they say, "Oh no, sorry, we have no land for sale." But it says right here in the newspaper that you have land for sale. No, we don't have any land for sale, not for a cemetery.
Well, and I think it's the Klan. Because people would be initially agreeable, and then they would change their mind. And so then they considered Rose Hill, and how I really think the Klan was pushing the buttons behind the scenes is, guess what happens? They have to dig the dead up again, because there was such resistance in Murray County, and they moved them from Rose Hill to the National Cemetery in Murfreesboro. And the doggone newspaper account that talks about the day they loaded the last of the coffins or the boxes onto the rail cars. Who's there? Frank Cheatham.
Yep.
John Brown, who was a pretty well-known member of the Klan, and at least 2 or 3 members, as they said, of the Ku Klux in their scarlet attire, because they didn't wear the white hoods yet. And I was like, oh my God, there they were. It was 1867. And they were making sure that the Yankees were going to get out of town.
I think the thing that has always kind of fascinated me about that story, too, is that Rose Hill was set up in such a way that the Confederates were buried in one area and the Federal soldiers were going to be buried right next to them. And there was even propositions of erecting a monument and calling it a reconciliation cemetery and all this. And you think about the scope of Civil War memory, how cool it would have been, how interesting that kind of setup visually would have been to have had Federal and Confederates buried next to one another with a kind of a Union monument between the two of them. What that looks like in 2020, 2024, as opposed to what happens, right? So those men are taken out of Columbia, brought to Murfreesboro, buried section I, back right-hand section of the cemetery. The thing that struck me about him is we always talk about how much effort is put into identifying the Confederate dead. And I almost feel like when you go to Stones River and you see how many unknown and unidentifieds there are, there's maybe I'm thinking too much about it. There's a little part of it that makes you think, you never get to thank the men who lay down their lives to save the nation. We'll never know who they are in so many instances. We just know that they're from Ohio or Indiana.
Well, and some of the ones that there's random guys
Right.
that are known. But one of the biggest blocks of men who are identified are from the 111th Ohio, because those guys, during the retreat after the Battle of Nashville, they knew that their men had been buried where they had fought. They were digging the bodies up on the 17th of December,
verifying who
to
they
identify
were.
them, and then they covered them back up so that when they were dug up again, they could be identified. That's an incredible story. I mean, digging someone up who's been in the ground 2 weeks, oh my goodness. But this was, you talk about what guys will do for one another when you're in that kind of a situation, because to be an unknown is really a kind of terrible fate itself. And some of these guys wanted to make sure that their buddies were known to posterity. And that, both cemeteries to me, because I spend obviously so much time, literally adjacent to the one at Carnton, but every time I go to Murfreesboro and to go in that cemetery, and Section I, where those guys are, and there are almost 400, I think, that were moved, in 66, dug up, and then finally there in 67. So they're really powerful places. And when it's all said and done, the campaign is over, years pass, this is where the former soldiers and families, friends, these are the places that they congregated at. This is how they came to say their goodbyes. And through the years, I think I've told a lot of guests, I've come to learn that cemeteries, no matter where they are much more for the living than they are for the dead. Because when you're dead, you're dead. Yeah. And they were created so that someone who knew them, or someone who learned about them like me, could go. It's about as close as you can get to them, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's as close as you can get to who they were as a mortal human being, and what happened to them. And these guys are scattered. We should also, I think I should. There's a lot of guys that aren't in these cemeteries.
Yeah, they're all over the country.
I think that I have, through the years, found that there are Franklin casualties buried in probably 250 locations. It's incredible. There are guys in Murfreesboro, there are guys in Nashville, there are guys in Franklin, there are some in Spring Hill. General John Adams is in Pulaski, but they're in
They're in
towns
Mississippi,
all over.
they're in Holly Springs, they're all over the place.
Mervyn Clark of the 183rd Ohio, his aunt and uncle came and got his body and took it back to Cleveland. Ferdinand Herrencourt is in Cincinnati.
Yep.
The list goes on and on. And so think about the effects of this. When we talk about 10,000 casualties, and think about every person, how many people you are related to or know. I think at a minimum, there's 250,000 people that are directly impacted by the battle.
Yeah.
And then as you go forward, how many people through the generations are connected to this? And so,
and we see that with the descendants. This is a great time to plug descendants forms and descendants applications, because that helps us to further tell the story of the soldiers who we can't talk to, we can't gather their information. But if you're sitting on your great grandfather's letters and you go, oh God, I wish somebody would care what was in this.
right.
We do care a lot.
Right.
And if you send that copy, you send a picture of it, we can learn a little bit more about that soldier's experience in this battle and in Tennessee campaign.
It's a great way to end this, because, when the campaign is over, here's the effect.
Yeah, all that's left is to bury the dead.
Here's the result. And we struggled for years with death. And now we struggle with, what did it all mean? And I think in the end, this is the campaign that brings an end to the war. And then as in the war's aftermath, we gathered up the dead. We created cemeteries. And we've been reckoning with it ever since. And so it's a great time to come out and see all of these places. The battlefields, the homes, the cemeteries, the ground, and, do some communing with the past, because it's It's really a healthy way to put into perspective that, as I told a group yesterday, we are not as divided
Yeah.
today as we were then.
Yep.
We were on the edge of killing 750,000 of ourselves, and we created national cemeteries, and we created private cemeteries across the land, and we took people's boys and husbands and friends home to little quiet corners because we were just awful to one another, and we should never repeat those mistakes. So there you have it. God bless America.
There you go.
How about that? Thanks, everybody.